In January 2024, the water towers in some Texas panhandle towns started overflowing. This was the result of a hack. We know that because the criminal hackers later posted a video showing how they could reset the controls in the water control systems and do so remotely. When I was at RSAC this year, this was the topic of discussion. A name was floating around, the Cyber Army of Russia Reborn. Yet it didn't sound familiar until experts at Mandiant linked it to the Sandworm criminal hackers, the same group responsible for NotPetya in the attack on the opening ceremonies at the Korean Olympic Games in 2018. I was also hearing at RSAC in the hallways how these older devices were in the municipalities of a few thousand or so, not the cities, not the major cities. There are lives at stake nonetheless if the water supply is interrupted or even terminated, especially in Texas, where the temperatures during the summer can easily reach into the low 100s Fahrenheit. This is the story about the critical skills gap in operational technology security and how it could have a real-world effect on your water supply and other critical infrastructures. I'm Robert Famosi. This is Error Code.
My name is Chris Walcutt. I'm the Chief Security Officer at DirectDefense. We're talking today about things to know about OT cybersecurity, the OT SCADA space. DirectDefense was founded in 2011. Security practitioners that had helped start Accuvant Labs. When it became Optiv, they jumped out and started over. And we have a practice called Connected Systems that is specifically focused in the OT SCADA space. We partner with companies like Clarity and Dragos to wrap OT managed services around those products, and we're one of the only firms out there that will do that for both IT and OT. So we also are a full-service cybersecurity boutique. So we've got pen testing, app testing, the full managed services. We do breach work, we do tabletops, some compliance, NIST-based stuff, CMMC, CSF, that kind of fun.
I interviewed Chris at RSAC outside on the sunny Yerba Buena Gardens. He just mentioned the IT-OT convergence. It always strikes me as funny that IT is just now discovering operational technology, which has been there all along. I wonder, was that his experience as well?
I started for a large energy company about 2000. So energy commodities trading, started on a help desk, sysadmin, network engineer, network architect. I moved over to director of IT for power generation. I moved from IT to the OT world in about 2005. And so one of the first things I noticed, one, I didn't know a lot about the technology, and two, I realized right away that there was a lot of distrust. And so the organization I was working for, I got permission to job shadow in the OT side with the technical controls engineers for a few weeks to kind of get my feet wet, and then worked towards implementing a true job shadowing between my staff and the OT staff to foster trust, let them get to know each other, and help them understand each other's problems. And it worked well enough that organization has maintained that program. And so a lot of times I'm helping companies figure out how to bridge the gap. The other thing that I've done is my team, the Connected Systems team, is all built of practitioners that are former system owners or designers. So SCADA system designer, PLC programmer, people who've worked for energy companies, water utilities, manufacturing firms running that side of the house. So when we come in and talk to a client, and we get introduced to the OT staff, we can break down that because they instantly have a level of trust with us because we've literally done their job. And so we understand that uptime is key. Nothing we do can impact what they're doing. And we help educate them in ways that they can make use of what IT is doing and help get the two sides to work together. Because a lot of times IT has got all the cool, fun tools that OT doesn't want to let in the environment, but it's not all vulnerability scanners that they're afraid of. Especially patch and vulnerability management, that's a big struggle a lot of times. There's some automated tools that, they want a different frequency and they don't want to auto push stuff, but that doesn't mean they can't use that for tracking and scheduling and maintaining. There's just some telemetry that would be really good for them to have. The other challenge that we find is that when companies purchase a platform for visibility and security in the OT space, they're not agent-based. they require network traffic analysis. So almost always there's network segmentation changes that have to happen to make those tools work right. And the product vendors in that space, once again, I'll go back to like a Dragos or a Clarity, they're not going to get into the business of helping you change your network around, to help you get the product up and running. We'll come in and get down in the weeds and help with the segmentation and say, this should change, these assets should move, you need an extra segment or zone here, and that's going to give you your choke points to get the visibility that you need to make the product worthwhile.
So is there a skills gap? Is there an OT skills gap?
There is a skills gap. There are some places you can go to get sort of OT security training. SANS is the primary vendor with their ICS 401, but that's if you have an extra $10,000, literally. And so not everybody can afford SANS. There are a few evangelists who are putting out free content, and then there's some conferences, right? So S4 is a good source. The people that started Hughes SecCon just spun up another one, OT SecCon. I was there 2 weeks ago. And there's some resources online. Idaho National Labs and CISA have done a good job of trying to publish both content and partnerships for free training. But that's not what's going to close the gap entirely. And so even in Cyber Patriot, middle school, high school, cyber defense competition, and CCDC, the college version, we are starting to see OT creep in. I've been a mentor at Cyber Patriot for about 10 years, and it's slowly that education is coming in for the the early adopters and the kids to learn. But it's still largely, you have to go hunting to try to find it.
So I wrote a book back in 2011 about when gadgets betray us. I really thought that IoT security would take off in the 2010s. Well, it didn't. So I asked Chris what he thought was fueling the discovery today in 2024.
The threat landscape has changed, and I think organizations are realizing, first off, there's a lot more interest in pulling data out of OT environments and using it for business analytics, right? You want to get data into an ERP system, some sort of order management system. A lot of times they're pulling it from the historian, and needing that data as close to real time as they can get it for the business analytics side has driven them to need to punch holes, to need to put DMZs in place. And because of that, now you're no longer air-gapped. There's a capability for a breach. Now you need visibility. You need to know what's happening in that environment. The SEC regulations changing for breach reporting. You need data faster. You don't want the downtime. The energy sector has had the NERC SIP regulations in place since 2006. It still boggles my mind that we haven't pushed, as messed up as NERC is, and I'm on a couple of committees and have been for years. OEA, the America's Water Infrastructure Act, was signed in 2018. It has no regulatory teeth. I literally sat in a meeting in 2018, and I was sitting between two EPA senior administrators, and they told a room full of water utilities and engineering companies that they were not going to audit and they would not fine them. And so they were like, all right, we're going to go home. We get to self-certify. You basically get to send a letter to the EPA that they did their own assessment. I've done a lot of that assessment work, but there's no money for it. Right? The water sector is poor compared to merchant energy. And so we do need something of a more regulatory framework. I was at an event last night where DHS Secretary Mayorkas spoke, and that question came up. And the public-private partnership only gets so far without something to drive that innovation, that level of regulation. We need something more than you can assess yourselves and send us a letter. That's not going to protect that infrastructure.
A lot of my OT discussions have focused around the perspective how much regulation is good.
So they've done it with NERC, so that framework could work. The problem is the funding of it, right? So to build a NERC-compliant framework and then have the tooling and the infrastructure to support it that you need for that type of regulation, there's no world where it isn't several $100,000s a year. So they do need that capability to have some way of helping fund that, because the water utilities aren't going to be able to go do a rate recovery the way the energy companies can. They're just not set up for it. And they don't have the merchant capabilities for other things like charging more for renewable energy or offering battery storage solutions. It's just a different space. But so our team, myself and one of my senior staff members, he's the PLC programmer, SCADA system designer, He was the lead author on the J100 standard rewrite. Like, his name's on the front. Our names and our company name are in that standard as helping with the rewrite. We worked for an engineering company that did a lot of work, both of us, prior to coming here. And so it's just a space we've been in. We work with Dr. Kevin Morley quite a bit and, feedback and get in the EPA meetings. But there's this continuous back and forth of we need to do something.
So, speaking of water, I often hear cited the Oldsmar incident, which apparently was an insider attack and, well, not really as exciting as we were first led to believe.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for that validation. Second, there are recent events happening in Texas, and I wondered if Chris could talk a little bit more about that.
So what's happening, and this is also true of the one in Pennsylvania, although Pennsylvania was targeted a specific product, right? So that was state-sponsored. They were going after Israeli firms. This Israeli firm makes a PLC. It was in the water system in Pennsylvania. They were targeting that specifically. But what typically happens is these water systems, like I said, they don't have the funding. They don't necessarily have cybersecurity professionals. A lot of the municipal governments are reliant on engineering firms that have a specialty practice in running these systems. So there's a few that come to mind that were running literally hundreds of these water SCADA systems. And because of that, because of the nature of that, you have a lot of remote access. And when you have remote access and it's not secured properly, or it's not being monitored so you can tell that the traffic has changed, you don't have the visibility to know there's a problem. And so sometimes these problems go undetected. Now, a lot of people worry that somebody is going to go and dump a vial of something in an aquifer and kill a bunch of people. Most people in the water sector kind of laugh at that because it really would take more like a couple tanker trucks worth of whatever that is. And you're not going to cause significant problems by like changing chemical levels because of the way the water sector is regulated. So they have to take samples multiple times a day. They have to upload that data to their regional governing authority. They're going to catch this stuff pretty fast, and they can operate in manual mode in ways that it's harder for big energy companies to do. So they can just cut themselves off and operate that way. But they are targets, and a lot of times you can go out on Shodan and find water SCADA systems. I mean, that's part of what CESA is doing, right, is they're going and looking for that stuff and then notifying. We did an assessment a couple of years ago for a municipality that had both energy and water, and we got control of their water SCADA system. My laptop was sitting on the hood of the truck outside the fence, and I had control of the SCADA system, and I was zoomed in on the pump station that supplied a major military installation with the name at the top, right? So we go out and we start looking around and determined that the SCADA system integrator was a new system. They were the ones that caused this problem. A little searching, they had installed the same system for another city, a couple hundred miles away in the same state, same problem. It was on Shodan, and they had left default credentials. So we were able to use the default credentials from the first one we compromised to look at and get into the second one, and then had to contact that entity and said, hey, we're white hats, we're good guys, we were doing this work for somebody else, we see this is a problem for you, please fix it. Let us know if you want help, right? And so that world exists. The tools are out there. Anybody can create an account in Shodan. Yeah, the bad guys, the good guys, the people that are just interested. So, but one of the biggest challenges is to put that visibility platform in place and to have the professional monitoring of people who know OT systems is not cheap. And so a lot of these water utilities can't afford that. So as we push towards a NERC-esque or anything else that's going to be regulation, we have to solve the funding problem as well.
I often talk to people about oil and gas, energy and health. Are there other critical infrastructures that we should be concerned about?
Telecommunications, rail, these are considered critical infrastructure. Like if you look at the DHS's, 16 categories, right? So rail isn't just the heavy transport rail of the world. The light rail systems that move people in cities, self-contained, they're fully automated. Done some work in that space. There's lots and lots of automation. You can hurt people. As we move towards autonomous vehicles, right, there's a concern there. Not just the self-driving capabilities, but true autonomy, right? There's a section of the Autobahn in Germany where they're doing testing of fully autonomous tractor-trailers, trucks for delivery. If you've got those, if they get to a point where they trust them enough to not have a driver on board and you can get control of them and run it through a public park, or, there's all kinds of things. If you're transporting hazardous materials, let's say, and you want to, crash it and cause a big spill, There's lots of things that I'm worried about in that space. I spoke at ISC West a few weeks ago about the IT and OT convergence. I'm talking tomorrow about OT third-party risk here at RSA. There is a big concern about physical security and building controls, right? So people kind of forget about those. Cameras and card readers, misconfigured cameras and NVRs are our pen testers' favorite way in. We find them, it's a jump point. And they usually get installed, and this is true of control systems too, they usually get installed by integrators who don't know the security world. It's not their expertise. Their expertise is in the cameras or the card readers or configuring that automated line for the proper function of whatever its job is. You need to have somebody come back and look at the security or have those conversations with the vendor up front to say, once this is installed, we want it penetration tested. We want to make sure it's secure. Turn off the features you don't need. The building controls problem is the same. And usually where this is a challenge is a lot of times the physical security infrastructure is managed by a physical security team that doesn't have cyber background. A lot of times they're law enforcement or military. The building controls a lot of times are managed by facilities people. They don't have cyber background either. What needs to happen is the conversations between physical security and cyber, the conversations between facilities and cyber to say, we have created a penetration point that is not only problematic, but is also potentially the ability to cause harm, right? So we were working for a large client. We're going through and doing assessments and network segmentation for all of their manufacturing plants. And we went to one facility and we found, we had their facilities person come in and show us the interface for the building controls for this big multi-million square foot facility. It was open to the internet so that the vendor could support it, and cybersecurity had no idea. We found it during the assessment on site. They had punched a hole, and so I said, if the vendor can get to it, there's no restrictions in the firewall because it wasn't done the right way, because cyber didn't know. So now anybody can get to this, and right? And it wasn't just HVAC and lights, it was boiler and chiller, things that can cause damage, right? So we see this kind of stuff.
So at RSAC, Chris delivered a talk about managing risk in OT environments. I asked him if there were some things that he could talk about here.
It is about managing risk in OT environments, third-party risk predominantly. So the big things, if you have and own OT, you are the system owner, it's your ecosystem. Make smart decisions about what you invite into that ecosystem. Remote access is a big topic. A lot of times there are organizations that have, for maintenance reasons, maintenance contracts, they allow third parties remote access. Nobody can ever tell me the name of the HVAC vendor that caused the target data breach, right? But you don't want to be that. You don't want to be target. So make sure that you control what the platform is. We see TeamViewer and VNC running rampant in these environments, and it's always a third party, like it's in their contract, right? Take it out of their contract. You mandate their remote control. You maintain access. Put a solution in that can get you all the way down to keystroke logging that you can replay and record what they do. Keep that control. The next thing is your hardware and software vendors. Require an SBOM, requires the bill of materials, ask them what chipsets they use, ask them about their open source software, keep track of it. It's part of your vulnerability management. Have something in the contractual language that says if a vulnerability is discovered, you will disclose it before you fix it. Require some sort of window for disclosure. Require that they notify you when the patch is available. Ask for a pen test of the product. Ask them to show you a report. Ask for IEC 62443 certification, right? ISA 99, IEC 62443, only certification out there for hardware right now. UL tried one 10 years ago. It didn't catch on. They're just about to ratify UL 2941, which is their new one. Either of those will work. We're helping companies bring products securely to market by helping them get those certifications. So the first battery storage system in the country to get 62443 certified, we helped through that process.
Certifications are great. They show a minimum level of compliance. And I'm familiar with the certifications around ISOs and IECs.
So we, in this case, 62443, the primary areas are 4-1 and 3-3. We wrote the policies and procedures. We did the penetration test of the as-built system. We did an application security test of the application they wrote around it and of the mini SCADA system they built, and then put all that together in a package and work directly with the client and the auditor to answer the auditor's questions, modify the documentation, get them certified. Now, the way 62443 works, if you change any component, you have to do it all over again. So they changed some components, so now we're going back through it again with them and making the modifications. We'll have to re-pen test it. The other thing that they're doing now is when they sell systems, when that gets installed in battery storage, for example, you're thinking shipping containers full of like Tesla batteries, right? They put a controller in front of it. It's sitting next to solar farms, wind farms. These are big utilities buying this stuff. So they are in NERC compliant requirements. We have to be able to document for NERC SIP what they need. And then when it gets installed, we do another pen test as built installed because they're making modifications to it in order to configure it for that client network, potentially changing the security posture. So yes, we're doing the documentation around it, the penetration testing, the application security testing, and then pen testing in place.
So I wonder if Chris would agree that we're borrowing from the IT world. A lot of the testing and a lot of the attacks are similar. OT, well, it's an entirely different beast. But these low-hanging fruit attacks, they seem to be all in the IT networking space, right?
In some cases. Okay. Part of the challenge is that OT systems are designed for resilience. And so resilience-based risk is something that we talk about because these systems are designed to stay in place for 15 and 20 years, right? Sometimes longer. We've seen systems as old as 40 years. And a lot of times because of that, they don't get patched. Not necessarily that the patches aren't available, but there's a major SCADA system vendor that is predominant through Asia Pacific that doesn't allow you to make any changes. They fully lock it down. You can't change anything except the operational parameters. You can't patch it yourself. The only way to get the patches is to have an expensive service contract. Sometimes the companies don't see the value in that, not realizing what they're giving up. And so we just assessed 2 systems in China and Japan for the same company that hadn't been patched in, let's say, 10 years. So sometimes the low-hanging fruit is the open vulnerabilities that there are technically fixes for, but for operational reasons, they don't get applied.
If they're not touching the devices themselves, couldn't you layer on some security controls?
They absolutely would. So there's things that you can do in monitoring, and there's things that you can do in protective mechanisms to try to prevent those problems. But if you don't have the visibility tools, if you haven't invested in that, and you don't have people monitoring who know what they're looking for, then you're never going to see it. The other big challenge is that just from an operational perspective, the people that work in this space, the operators, the system operators, are accustomed to doing things like having user 1 and user 2 as accounts. Role-based access control, right? I can't say who made the change that crashed the system because nobody logs in with their own credentials. Pushing organizations towards adopting change around access control and identity and access management is another big one, right? So it's vulnerability management, patch management, visibility, remote access, contractual language for third-party risk, and then identity and access management. And so what they'll say is, well, at shift change, if somebody comes in and you log a person out and you log a person in, then we have a blip in the data. And the way to get around that, and a lot of them already have 2 consoles, is to have 2 consoles. You log one out first, right? Log the new person in. Once it's up and running, then you do the second one. It's a lot of pushback based around this is how we've always done things. And so you just have to educate them on why it's a problem, get the buy-in from leadership, and make the changes. A lot of these changes don't cost money, right? The vendor remote piece, the contract language, the identity and access management piece, the vulnerability and patch management piece, none of those cost a dime. Network segmentation can get expensive. The visibility tools can be expensive. The monitoring, if it's a third party, or even if you want to do it in-house, but then you have to train your staff about OT. So you've got to send them to that $10,000 SANS training unless you have another source for something like that, right? So we've done a few at conferences like Introduction to SCADA, like what is it? I always start my talks with just a very little quick, for the average user, what is a SCADA system? Anytime a computer controls a physical device and make an action, and what I talk about is Nest, right? Because people are familiar with that, right? The HMI is the screen on the thermostat and the app on your phone. The PLC is in the thermostat that controls the changes to the fan speed and the pressure and all that. And the RTU, the sensing, is the thermometer and the fan speed sensor and the pressure sensors, like just very basic. Now extrapolate that out to a drinking water system or a power plant or manufacturing where you've got conveyors and metal stamping and sensors and, robotic systems moving stuff around. It's just education. A lot of this is education.
I'm wondering if Chris had any experience with cloud-based SCADA systems. The problems are basically cloud-based, and they're not necessarily unique to the OT environment.
You get both. Yeah. It's a 2-for-1, right? So you get all the traditional cloud-based problems. In fact, one of the big challenges for some of the vendors, so what's considered best in breed in antivirus right now, like the one that everybody goes to is probably CrowdStrike. For that to function properly, it requires connection to the internet. So do you take the best in breed and install it in your plants and then punch a hole for it to talk to the internet? Some clients are doing that. Do you take a system that can function offline and you need to update manually, but you maintain your quote-unquote air gap? Nobody really does air gap anymore, but to maintain that capability, some are choosing that. Either way, you have to make that decision, right? Cloud-based is the same thing. You're not pushing data out. You can do it securely. Hopefully you have some sort of collector that's sitting in a DMZ that's taking the telemetry and the instruction sets from the plant or whatever it is, and then pushing it to the cloud from there and not a direct punch through. That's up to the team that installed it. I know in the NERC SIP world, it's still a no-no, right? You can't do cloud-based stuff in NERC SIP. It's still in the regulations. There's working groups around it, but it still hasn't been adopted that that's a permissible thing.
I'm wondering if, as a model, that can be adapted to other critical infrastructures.
Could be. It has its challenges. One of the big advantages, like if you look at what the TSA has done with like their pipeline regulation, and they've put out some others for transportation, right, rail and healthcare. They basically have like cut and pasted and changed a few things for each one. They're not industry specific per se. The good thing that NERC did is they built these working groups. Each regulation has its own working group, in some cases multiples, and the working groups are public-private partnership. So you've got system owners, you've got utilities, you've got merchant energy companies, you have consultants. They allow consultants to get involved. Engineering firms, I've been involved in them, just being here at DirectDefense, and my previous employer has supported it. You get the feedback, you get the discussion, you get the arguments, and then before any change happens to a NERC regulation, it has to go to vote. So all the registered entities, all the system owners, all the system operators that are licensed by NERC to make these systems work and to control them, they get a vote. And you have to have enough percentage vote to approve any of those changes. So you really do have the industry in some ways self-regulating. The government's top-down making sure it happens. They're the finding authority, they're the audit authority. But that is a model that could benefit any other industry that's considered critical infrastructure, right? The energy sector people don't necessarily know the ins and outs of the water systems. The water system people don't know the rail system. So that is a model, even with its problems, that could be at least a baseline to try to bridge that gap.
And could something like that bubble up from water or transportation?
It could, right? And so the EPA, while they administer a lot of facets of water, they're not in the best position to administer cyber regulations for water. CISA could be, but do we need a national water authority the way we have FERC and then under it NERC and NRC for the nuclear side? Especially, and nuclear is another interesting space because there's this push into small modular reactors, right? So the SMR, some see the SMR as the green energy solution for bigger data centers, and if we have more communities that are going to move towards, EVs, the charging station capacity, the power grid isn't necessarily one of the big challenges. Is there are still a lot of parts of the country and the world where the transmission line infrastructure isn't sufficient. You could build a new power plant, you could add on to the existing one, you can't get the power there. If you can put an SMR much closer to where the power is needed, some of the new designs can burn the spent fuel from the current reactors, and what you're left with is material that doesn't have the right kind of radioactivity to create a dirty bomb. So you don't need all the armed guards and all the same, you do, but you don't need the same level of protection we have now for the boiling water reactors.
So we're not only talking about big monopolies like PG&E here in Northern California, we're talking about smaller utilities as well.
So in the energy sector, you've got the NRECA, National Renewable Energy Cooperative Association, right? They've got a lot of sort of nearly free or free resources for the energy side. The MSISAC offers resources. Now, their Albert platform has gotten some bad press. Some organizations have actually given it back, it's basically free. But they offer SOC services, they offer incident response. There are resources there. I think AWWA has made some inroads in trying to offer services and partner with companies, but it's going to take that communal approach to get there in some cases. Some of these water utilities serve 5,000, 10,000 people. They actually, if it's 3,301, I think is the low baseline for OEA. If they serve fewer customers than that, they don't have to do anything. They're not required. So 3,300 really is kind of the starting point.
So it really could be like water. The water problems that we've had recently in Texas, where there are small utilities that fall under that number.
But even some of the larger ones, you can serve 50,000 customers and still maybe not have a single pure cybersecurity practitioner, right? Those organizations may have a staff of 10 or 15 or 20. An organization that size, they're lucky if they have 2 IT people, right? They're outsourcing a lot to those engineering firms that support them, or there's SCADA system integrators that support them and can help tune and run and install. But then they're relying on those firms to have cybersecurity expertise, and a lot of them don't. So you get a 3,000 or 4,000 person engineering firm, they might have 2 or 3 cybersecurity people, and they may or may not know OT. They may be focused on the internal security of that firm. So we do CISO as a service, and I'm CISO for a couple of engineering firms. One's like 2,000-ish people, one's about 800 people. They even struggle. They're not going to have the finances to support hiring a full-time experienced CISO of their own. So they've gone to the fractional model with somebody that knows their industry.
So earlier we mentioned an OT skills gap. How acute is the gap?
It's fairly sizable. Yeah. It is fairly sizable. Regulation drives compliance for the sake of regulation, not compliance for the sake of security. What we really need is the security forward, security first, risk-based approach, right? And that risk-based approach is supposed to guide the decisions that are made. It should guide how the money is spent. But some of those industries, like I said, they don't generate enough revenue to support the monies required to do some of these things. So that's also going to continue to be a challenge.
I'm wondering, how is that trending?
I think closing the gap on visibility really is one of the bigger challenges. And so one of the things that we're doing at DirectDefense is trying to wrap that visibility monitoring story around the platform. So because we can do both the IT and the OT side, and because we understand the platforms and the technology on both the IT and the OT side, we're partnering with the Clarities and the Dragoses of the world to try to bring that forward and offer to their clients. When you first install this, you might need to make those network segmentation changes. You're not alone. We can help with that, right? We have the experienced SOC. All our staff are full-time employees, and they're all U.S. citizens because some of our clients require that. But that's very attractive to the critical infrastructure space, and in some cases it is for the manufacturing space as well. It makes us a little more expensive, but getting that expertise, getting people that are responding to the incidents that know what a PLC is, that know what an HMI is, that understand the DNP and Modbus protocols, gives them a level of comfort that the plant managers are much happier about.
So you can go to school and you can get your CS degree and you can get educated. Yes, but are there programs bubbling up that deal with OT, hands-on?
There is some stuff starting to happen. Some of the education vendors that are partnering with the universities are starting to come out with content. University of Texas San Antonio has a long history. They run the back end of both Cyber Patriot and CCDC, sort of the competition systems. They've got some OT content. I think they were one of the first cybersecurity PhD programs in the country, and they've got some content in their undergraduate and graduate degree programs. You're starting to see some of it pop up. The majority of it is still for-profit. Even the vendors that are doing it for the colleges, a lot of times that content is being provided by for-profit organizations that some see as profiteering, some see as like degree mills, right? We'll finance your stuff. Or I read something recently about one that guarantees you a job paying above a certain level, and if they get you that job, you owe them like 10% of your salary for the first 2 years. Like, the model's a little broken. I mean, CISA and INL are bridging the gap some, and I would love to see those programs expand and be open to more people, because that's a great way. If you can get the education through them, you've got hands-on with the equipment. Also, I live in Orlando, and the University of Central Florida has a modeling and simulation program. So the modeling and simulation space could also help bridge that gap. every nuclear power plant's required to have a training lab with a full simulator of their space, like literally a full functional reproduction. But there's nothing to say that you couldn't have stuff that's built just software or cloud service to get training on how to do this stuff. You know, a lot of people that want to learn how to fly, they start with Microsoft Flight Simulator. There's no reason we couldn't have something similar.
Chris mentioned he started in 2000 with an energy company. Had he been in cyber before that?
No, and I didn't start in cyber with them. Started on the help desk.
So how did he end up there?
So I progressed through, like, application packaging taught me more about the interactions of applications with the operating system. System administration and network engineering taught me more about the interactions of packets across the wire. I actually have a now defunct certification in network forensics, so reading packets like the Matrix, taught by a gentleman named Bill Alderson, who helped put the Pentagon networks back together after 9/11. He's one of the world's foremost experts on network forensics. And so he used to offer this 4-tier certification. One of my colleagues and I went to his training and got all 4 levels of his certification. And so for me, between starting to learn packet inspection, network team, we were doing the firewall changes. We had a separate cybersecurity team, but they didn't do the firewalls. The network team did. And so getting involved in that, I was interested. And so I started talking to the security people. The CISO there, we've worked 3 places now together, and he's a good friend of mine. He's at Gartner, and he moderates all the podcasts for ISC Squared. So I just surrounded myself with the security practitioners and was interested in something self-taught. And then when I moved over to the power generation side, security was a big focus. We had completely flat networks. The power plants didn't have firewalls, except for the nuclear ones. And somebody on the cybersecurity side downloaded Nessus on a Friday afternoon. They'd never used it before, wanted to try it out. And they turned it loose on a 10.class A network, and they took 16 power plants offline. Now, partly vendor supply chain problem. So Emerson Ovation was the operating system. At the time, Emerson wouldn't let you harden or patch the systems. So they were running on an old version of Solaris, weren't allowed to upgrade. All those Solaris systems had cups turned on by default, print server. And so each port that the scanner tried to open, it thought was another print job, and just gave it some more memory until there was no more memory, and it crashed. 16 peaker plants on a summer afternoon caused a brownout in Baltimore, right? We got the firewall money the next day, literally the next day. Funny how that works. So, but, you know, being involved in that, starting to see, I was involved in writing the first NERC SIP policies because I took over like 2005. They were coming into play. 2006 is really when they went into effect. And so I had 9 plants in California. WEC had not done any audits yet. We volunteered to go early and help WEC train their staff on audits and help us get we got kind of like, we'll audit, but give you get kind of a free pass for going first. And that's how I met Patrick Miller, who I've known now for years. He was at EnergySec for a while. You know, he was running that WEC team. And so, circle of practitioners, I got more and more interested in the security side. And then I jumped to, from there, it was Constellation Energy. I went from there to SunGard and was doing threat and vulnerability management there. So we were, handling a lot of breaches, vulnerability management for 1 million assets, some insourced CISO as a service stuff. I went from there to Black & Veatch, 100-year-old engineering firm, and we're talking about securing critical infrastructure. I had the NERC background. We're doing consulting for some of the biggest energy companies in the world, helping them secure their stuff. I just kind of grew into it, to be honest.
But that isn't a path for everybody. We need to find another way to build and satisfy the skills gap.
No, it's not. It's certainly not. So, what are the universities doing? What are other trade organizations doing to offer training, right? So I will commend like ISC Squared for having the associate of certifications. You don't have the 5 years of experience, but you can study and learn and pass the test and then get the associate and build your experience and then eventually get the certification. I would love to see an easier path that isn't $10,000 to get SANS type training. It's good training. It was originally built by the people from INL. The first SANS SCADA security conference was 2006 in Orlando. I attended it. It was quality. But we need that pathway to be able to train more people for less money.
I'd like to thank Chris Walcutt for coming on the show and talking about the skills gap in operational technology. Hey, if you're enjoying Error Code, tell a friend. I'm sure there are other people out there who like narrative information security podcasts. And I'd really like to hear from you. Join us on Discord. Search for Error Code Podcast to join the server, or go to errorcodepodcast.com to get more details. And tell me what you like, and even what you don't. I have more conversations coming up. Subscribe today. I don't want you to miss out.